Good morning. My name is Cormac Rojas. It's July 14th, 2017. It is 9:54 a.m. We're in Springfield, Illinois, and we're going to conduct the interview with, do you want to say your name?
Iris Isaura Miranda-Kirschner.
Kirschner. And where and when were you born?
I was born May 14th, 1955, so I just celebrated my 62nd birthday.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And where were you born?
New York City, St. Clair's Hospital in Manhattan.
And your parents, who were they and what were their occupations?
My father was Manuel Miranda, born in Rincon, Puerto Rico, was an electrician in New York. And my mother was Isaura Rosa Miranda, also born from Rincon, Puerto Rico. And she was a pattern maker at a factory. She was a teamster, so I always tell people my mother's a teamster.
Wow. Did you have sisters, brothers?
Yes, I'm the oldest of three daughters. My middle sister is Diana Miranda-Kirschner. She's an executive with MetLife Insurance Company. She lives in New Jersey. And my youngest sister is Ellen Miranda-Lebec. She is a CPA with the Internal Revenue Service, and she lives in Valley Stream, Long Island, New York.
And what's your current profession right now?
I am a retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, and I am a tax attorney. I just retired in February of this year.
Wow. And did any of your siblings serve as well?
No. I had a grandfather who served in World War I. I have all of his doughboy stuff, including his pistol. My grandfather served, my father-in-law served with the Army, Patton's Third Army, and was part of the D-Day landing. My father was in the Air Force, 1953 to 1955. He was an air policeman posted at Dover Air Force Base, Delaware. And then there's me. I went through Army ROTC, which I'll talk about shortly, and then transferred into the Air Force after I met the love of my life.
Huh.
My nephew, I understand, will be enlisting in the Marines within the next few months. So there's been one member of each family generation has served. So.
And you said you were in the ROTC?
Yes. In 1972, I had very good grades. I had very good, strong academics, and I wanted to go to one of the military academies. The academies were not open to women. When I spoke to our congressman, I believe it was Congressman Rangel at the time, he recommended that I look into the ROTC program, which I had never heard of. So I went to talk to an Army recruiter, and we did a lot of research and found out that ROTC was a college program. And if you got a scholarship, it was a full ride, room, board, books, fees, and then you owed them 6 years upon graduation, and you were commissioned as a second lieutenant. There were 1,000 ROTC scholarships nationwide that were available. They were testing the program for women, so they set aside 20 scholarships for women. And I got one of them. I applied and got accepted into Hofstra University in Hempstead, New York. It's where a lot of the vice presidential debates have occurred these last few years. And I was a business major. I was pre-law. And there were 11 women who started the program with me. Of the 11, 3 of us completed the program. Mary, Roberta, and myself. And of the 3 of us, I stayed in to retirement age. And I was commissioned in 1977. I was, even though I was a business major and I was bilingual, the Army put me into the Transportation Corps because the combat branches and the combat support branches were not open to women. My ROTC chairman, Colonel Jackson, said that he had not been given any guidance as to how to train the women cadets. So he decided that we were going to do everything that the male cadets did. So this way there would never be any doubt that we would meet standards. And now with the benefit of hindsight, I'm really glad he did. Because I graduated with honors from ROTC, and it's like, unless you're better than me, I can hold my own. I graduated in 1977. I was commissioned June 24th as a second lieutenant. I had also applied and gotten into law school. I deferred law school because I wanted to take a break between college and law school. I wanted to fulfill my active duty commitment and make some money, so this way I wouldn't have to take student loans out for law school. I went to Fort Eustis, Virginia. I was in charge of the motor pool while I was there. I met a young man who was from the Air Force. His name was Corey Alan Kirschner. He was a member of the Medical Service Corps, and we started dating. I completed active duty. I returned to New York. I went to Fort Totten, New York as a reservist. I was assigned to the 318th Transportation Company. I was their training officer. I went to law school. I began law school. And so I was a full-time law student, a weekend warrior reservist, and a part-time law clerk for a judge in Manhattan. In the meantime, Corey Alan Kirschner, who would eventually become my husband, got into NYU graduate school, and the Air Force was sending him for his master's in hospital administration. So we were lucky in that we could spend time together in New York while I suffered through law school and he suffered through grad school. We both graduated in 1981. I was trying to become an Air Force JAG, an Army JAG, and the transportation folks said that they didn't want to release me because I was such a good transportation officer. They didn't want to lose me and release me to the Army JAG Corps. I was coming up for a new assignment on active duty, and Corey was coming up for his assignment with the Air Force on active duty, and we were concerned that they would not station us together, especially since I was 3 years older than him and I was 4 years ahead of him career-wise. So I was ripe for an overseas assignment. And we talked to our assignments people, and they all told us that even though we would be married by the time we would report to our assignments, we were not married at the time they were working the assignments. And I was a little distraught, to say the least, at the concept that we would be getting married and not being stationed together. So we eloped.
Oh.
We went to Las Vegas, and March 23rd of 1981, we eloped. Then the next week we came back. It was during spring break. We came back, and I gave a copy of the marriage license to my assignments guy. Major Rosen was his name, and he gave a copy of his license to his assignments guy, and then a few weeks later they called and said, "You're going to San Antonio." I went to Fort Sam Houston to be the executive officer of the 277 Engineer Company, so I cross-trained into the combat engineering field. I built bridges, roads. I was a quarry asphalt platoon leader. And then Corey was the clinic administrator at Kelly Air Force Base in San Antonio. In addition to doing that, when I did about 6 months at Fort Sam, I went back into the reserves. And so my whole military career has always been working 2 jobs. One as a reservist and one as a civilian. I had gotten a hired with a law firm in San Antonio, Brock, Bingham and Person, as a tax attorney. So I worked full-time as a tax attorney and then part-time as a weekend warrior at Fort Sam. And we were there until November of 1982. And at that time, Corey got selected to be the administrator at a clinic in RAF Alconbury, England, just outside of Cambridge. The Army didn't have any bases in that area. The nearest base was up in Yorkshire, which is quite a distance. We were kind of concerned, what we were going to do now. So Corey spoke to his staff judge advocate, Colonel Stanton, who reached out to me and said that the Air Force desperately needed JAGs, and would I consider transferring from the Army to the Air Force. I didn't know you could do this. It was something called an inter-service transfer, where one morning you wake up and you're in the Army, and then you take a new oath, and then you go to bed that evening and you're in the Air Force. So it took a while to get the paperwork done, about 10 months. But then in 1983, I transferred over and became an Air Force JAG. And Corey swore me in to the Air Force, which was very exciting. He and I were stationed at RAF Alconbury. I was on active duty. I was the Area Defense Counsel, a Trial Defense Counsel, from 1982 to 1987. In addition to being the Area Defense Counsel, I was also an instructor with the University of Maryland London campus. I taught aviation law, air and space law, business law, those kinds of courses. Then in 1987, we PCS'd to Washington, D.C. Corey went to work for the Surgeon General. I believe it was Surgeon General Koop at the time. He was a fellow at his office, and then he subsequently went to work for the Air Force Surgeon General, and then to the Joint Staff under Colin Powell. I went back to DC, and I went to work as a reservist at the Appellate Defense Council Division. Every military court-martial gets an automatic review for appeal, and so I would work those appellate briefs and do those reviews. I was there till early 90s, and I was a reservist until I transferred over to their civil litigation, the Air Force Civil Litigation Division. Since I had a business background and I was a tax attorney, they were having me handle a lot of the financial cases, misappropriation of funds and things like that. So I was there till 95. And as a civilian, I was a tax attorney in the criminal tax division of the Internal Revenue Service. So I prosecuted criminal cases, big dollar criminal cases, because obviously the IRS doesn't prosecute little dollar criminal cases. So we were there till 1995. Then in 1995, we PCS to Scott Air Force Base in southern Illinois. In Belleville, Illinois is the nearest town, but it's 19 miles across the river from St. Louis, Missouri. And Corey was the Deputy Surgeon General for U.S. Transcom, and I was assigned as a reservist to the Air Mobility Command Legal Office. And I handled a lot of the jurisdiction tax issues that Air Force policy, all kinds of things like that. I also handled Civil Reserve Air Fleet contracting issues because I wasn't afraid of numbers. Anything that dealt with math and dollars, they'd ask me to handle, because a lot of lawyers, I guess, freak out when they see numbers. We were there. While I was there, I worked as a tax attorney with the law firm of Mathis, Marifian, Richter, and Grandy. and then I worked with the law firm of Konosky and Associates. I think it's called Konosky Bresney now. We served until 2001. One of the promises we had made for each other was that we were going to try and retire in a joint ceremony if we could. Wow. And since I was 4 years ahead of him, I was eligible to retire much sooner, but I held out until the medics were allowed to retire. So on August 1st, 2001, we retired in a joint ceremony at Scott Air Force Base. We made history. It was the first time a husband and a wife retired together. And I even bought a picture to share.
Wow.
Then I was in the private sector. As I said, I was in the private sector after I retired. And then 9/11 happened. And I got a call from one of my JAG school classmates, Colonel Hillier was his name. And he asked me if I would consider returning to the Air Force. So I told him, I said, when you retire, it takes an act of Congress to call us back. And he said, oh, no, not as a military member, but as a GS civilian attorney. Apparently, the contracts attorney at the 375th Air Mobility Wing at Scott Air Force Base was a Army reservist also, and he had been activated and as a result of 9/11 and was sent to Alabama. And so they needed someone to fill the position. So I said, well, I guess I could do that for a year or two. And that was 16 years ago. I did that job until February 18th, 2017, when I retired a second time from the Air Force. So my retirement ceremony will be on August 23rd, because even though we did elope on March 23rd, we did have a formal wedding on August 23rd, 1981. It was our way to say goodbye to family and friends. And this way, Corey can be there too. Corey passed away Labor Day of 2013. And I promised, well, we had promised that we would retire in another joint ceremony as civilians, and this way he can be there too. I think we need to take a breather for a second. I have to get a tissue. I got tissues. Tissues. Wow. Been doing well. I didn't break out a tissue in a while. Okay. Hold on. I don't want any black circles here. Okay, so where was I? I retired a second time. That's right. And I will be having my ceremony and ice cream social at Scott Air Force Base on August 23rd. So this way Corey can be there in spirit. So you're going to have to ask me some questions, because that's kind of the chronology.
There's just so much there.
Yeah, I know. I wanted to do this because we had no mentors for women in the early 70s. I remember I approached a Hispanic colonel.
Okay.
I'm sorry, this room's being used. Hi.
I'm looking for Michelle to do another one. I don't know what other room is she in.
I don't know. You'll have to check upstairs.
There's a guy around. I think it's right next door.
That's okay. That's okay. Give me a chance to blot stuff here. Anyway, I remember asking him if he would mentor me. And he said, quote, "I can't waste my collateral on a female." You know, this is 1973, not 1873, and so I never had the benefit of mentorship. I think it's important, and this is something I have stressed every single day of my civilian career and my military career, that if you have a chance to mentor, do so. Because I think I really could have achieved greatness if I had been mentored. So,
Yeah.
oh, okay. Okay, thank you, thank you. There were so few Puerto Rican officers, a lot of Puerto Rican enlisted, a lot of Puerto Rican men, a lot of Puerto Rican women who were enlisted, but I never encountered another Puerto Rican officer until I got to Washington, D.C. in 1987. Wow. I never had a female boss in my entire military career, a superior officer, until I became a civilian. And then my first female boss, Staff Judge Advocate, was a captain that I had mentored years prior. And she had a real bright light about her, and I expected her one day to come back as the Judge Advocate General. And she subsequently became the first one-star JAG.
Wow.
And she came back to serve not only as our Staff Judge Advocate, but then she came back to serve as the Transcom Staff Judge Advocate. Jerice Sanborn was her name. So I'm seeing a lot of change. We could have had it sooner if people were willing to gamble on us, if people were willing to mentor us. That's a regret. Okay.
So I wanted to ask you about the ROTC program you mentioned.
Yes,
you said
yes.
that 11 of you started.
Yes.
And that 3 ended, 3 finished. And
Yeah.
you mentioned their names.
Yes. Roberta Gaynor was one, and Mary Margaret Burrell was the other. I went on active duty. I lost touch with them. And then when I transferred into the Air Force, I really lost touch with everybody. It wasn't until I retired in 2001 and the alumni newsletter printed the blurb about Corey and me that Colonel Blanchard, who was Captain Blanchard when I was in ROTC, he was one of my instructors, saw the name and saw that I was in Chatham and reached out to me. And he said, we often wondered what happened to you because we knew, you had such a persona. We were like, what, she just vanished into thin air? And I said, no, I didn't vanish into thin air. I met my soulmate and he was in the Air Force and I transferred into the Air Force. And he was like, oh. So then I kind of brought him up to speed. I said, yeah, I did make it to law school. I've been practicing for now 36 years. And so I said, whatever happened to Roberta and Mary? And he said he doesn't know what happened to Mary. He heard that Roberta went into the reserves. She was a military Army MP and retired out of the reserves. But that's all he had heard. I have no way of confirming that one way or the other, especially when I was stationed in so many different places. And as a reservist, I did a lot of special tours. I was in Alabama, Florida, you name it, all kinds of places where I served for special tours. So I don't know what ever happened to them. Colonel Blanchard told me he retired, then became Dean Blanchard at Hofstra. That's why he saw my write-up, because he was the dean, I think, of graduate admissions. And I asked him whatever happened to my other instructors, and so he told me that Colonel Jackson, who was my ROTC chairman of the department, retired and lived, he had married a German girl when he was a young officer, and so they moved back to Germany. And Captain Jones, who was another instructor, retired, and I think he worked for a bank or something like that. But I really fell out of touch with everybody. There was one cadet, this is funny, there was one cadet, Anthony Moncayo. We were seated alphabetically, so it was Frank Kubicki, Leo Martinez, Iris Miranda, and Anthony Moncayo. So that was the row. And after my retirement announcement was posted in the newsletter, I got a call from the Hofstra University Alumni Association. They said they were interested in starting a chapter in Illinois, and would I help establish the alumni chapter. I didn't think there were that many of us in Illinois to begin with. But when most people say they want to start a chapter, they mean in Chicago. And I'm like, no, I live in Chatham, just south of Springfield. And if we're going to do it, it's going to be in Springfield, the state capital. It's not going to be in Chicago. We had a bit of a disagreement on that. But they sent me a list of Hofstra graduates, alumni, who had some ties to Illinois. And I had forgotten that Anthony Moncayo was also pre-law, and he went to law school in Chicago. So I went to the bar listings, and I looked him up, and I called him. I hadn't spoken to the man in almost 40 years, And I said, I don't know if you remember me, but, he goes, of course I remember you. And so we've renewed our friendship.
Wow.
So that was a little bonus. Frank Kubicki, I found, he did 20 years on active duty. He was stationed in Panama, married a Panamanian girl, and after retirement, I think he retired to Florida and then subsequently relocated to Panama. So those are the only ones I knew from my program. In law school, in my law school class, we had about 90 students in my section, because once again we were broken up alphabetically. There was only one military member. He was Army, and he was going to law school on funded a legal education program where the military gives you the full ride for law school, and then you owe 2 years for every year. With ROTC, you owed 6 years in any combination: 2 years active, 6 reserve. 4 reserve, or 4 and 2, 3 and 3. So I did a total of 6 years in the Army and 18 years in the Air Force. And of the 24 years, 6 years total of active duty, and the rest in reserve components.
So I actually wanted to ask you,
Yes,
when
sir.
you first enlisted, you're a minority, and you're
Oh, yeah.
and you're female.
Oh, yeah.
So this was
In
inherently
73.
challenging, right? So
People ask me, oh, well, how, were you harassed? I said, I wouldn't call it harassment, I'd call it cruelty. And there was one time, you have ROTC classes during the academic year, and then you go to ROTC basic camp between sophomore and junior year. They call it camp. It's basic training. It's not camp. And then between junior and senior year, you go to advanced camp. You go to Fort Campbell or Fort Knox, now I can't remember, for basic camp, and then Fort Bragg for advanced camp. And it's 8 weeks, 6-8 weeks. It feels like an eternity. I know, and I try to remember if it was my basic camp or my advanced camp. I think it was my basic camp. They tell you that because you're on scholarship, if you flunk out of the program, the Army still owes you. You enter the Army as an E5. So that's incentive to finish the program.
Sure.
And I know that there was one day we were all getting mistreated, and our drill sergeant said, "Now remember, you can't just walk out of here because you still belong to us. You'll just go down the road and we'll send you to basic training." And I remember telling him, "I want to stay here marginally more than I want to come back." See, so that should tell you, I'm staying here, but marginally more. And he was hysterical laughing when I told him that. The advanced camp was huge because it was the entire East Coast, and we had about 200 women. They did not keep, they didn't segregate us. There were 5 women per training platoon, so each squad had a woman. We did okay. We got through it. It was difficult, but I'm very grateful that Colonel Jackson had us do everything that the men did, because when we got to basic camp and training camp, by that time the program had been tweaked, so some of the requirements for women had been softened. I don't know if they still do that. I hope not, because I know women today want to be in the combat arms, and they want to be rangers and pararescue and SEALs, and it's tough. It's tough. It takes a special kind of character. But the lessons that you learn carry you through life. Kind of like what Admiral McRaven once said, make your bed. Make your bed every day, and at least you've accomplished one thing, and that sets the tone for the day. So yes, it was challenging. I've had instructors tell me, "Oh, I was an honor student." A lot of instructors would ask me if I was admitted to Hofstra under a affirmative action program. So I said, "No, I'm an ROTC scholarship cadet." They were floored, because you're talking the early 70s, the ROTC building on campus had been firebombed during the protests. So that was just unheard of. I've had professors in law school tell me, "Oh, we didn't know that Puerto Ricans could get A's." And I said, to which I responded, "Not only do we get A's, we live in houses and drive cars too." So you're talking the late 70s, early 80s. So yes, I've been called, as an attorney, I've been called some terrible things, but I've been called some really bad things based on my ethnicity and my race. Oh yeah. And I turn it on its head, because I look at it this way. I may be the only attorney you meet, so how I behave colors my profession. I may be the only officer you meet. I may be the only Puerto Rican woman that you meet, and how I behave colors my ethnic group, my comrades, my colleagues. So I'm very mindful of how I come across. And that stems also from my parents. My parents have said, "We've sacrificed a lot for you, and we expect a lot from all 3 of you." And I think we've done them proud.
Seems like all 3 of you have delivered.
Oh yes.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned meeting the love of your life.
Yes,
And
Corey.
How did you guys meet?
Oh, it's hysterically funny. I didn't meet him. People assume we met through the military. Oh, we did not. I was taking a tropical marine biology course in the British Virgin Islands, It was sponsored through Hofstra University. It was for biology majors, but I had taken biology for non-majors, and I had gotten A's in both courses. And I asked Dr. Kaplan, he was the professor and chairman of the biology department at the time, if I could go take this course, because I love the beach and I'd like to take the class, even though I was not a major. And he said, well, you did really well in my 2 courses. I'll do a waiver for you. So I said, great. And I had finished all of my classes in May of '77. I was not going to get commissioned until June 24th of '77. And the course was 3 weeks between finals and my commissioning date. So it really fit. And I was always a very thrifty person, so I had saved up. When you're on ROTC, in addition to your tuition, your room and board, and your school supplies and lab fees being paid, you also get a monthly allowance. And we're talking $50 a month, which was a lot of money back then because the minimum wage was $2. And I also worked as a receptionist for a local business, so I would always, save all my money. And I figured, I could take this course and pay for the trip and kind of do a break between school and getting commissioned, because I knew I'd then be leaving for Fort Eustis. So I went on this trip. I didn't have any scuba gear because obviously you're going to go, the way Dr. Kaplan explained it to me was, in the mornings you would have classes, and then in the afternoons you would go snorkeling and diving for specimens, and then in the evenings you would spend identifying the organisms and setting up the research lab, because that's what the school was doing. They were setting up a research lab on this little island. And so he said it's very intense because it's, I think it was 18 days. And there were 15 students from Hofstra, and then 15 students from, I think it was Johns Hopkins University. All biology majors coming in. So I was like, wow, I have to buy all this stuff. And I was living in Manhattan. Who has a need for scuba gear and diving gear? So he said to me, Dr. Kaplan said, that one of his biology majors had been to the course the year before. Her name was Christina Cassidy, and to ask if I could borrow her equipment. So I got in touch with her. She came to my dorm room, and she brought everything. And then she said, oh, you'll need this, and this. And so she gave me some extra tips, which was really handy. And I said, well, how do I get these stuff back to you? Because she lived out in the end of eastern Long Island in Suffolk County, and I lived in the city, and I was going to be leaving for Fort Eustis, so it's not as if I'd have free time. And being a New Yorker, I didn't have a driver's license, much less a car. So she said, my ex-boyfriend is going to be on the trip. He's going to be setting up the lab. His name is Corey. So ask for him. So I said, oh, okay, no problem, because he can get it back to me. He knows where I live. I said, sounds like a plan. So then we flew from JFK to San Juan, and then from San Juan we flew to Virgen Gorda, I think it was, in British Virgin Islands, and then we took a boat from there to this teeny little speck of an island, and that's where we were going to be. And I remember when I got to Puerto Rico, I said, and mind you, everybody's got all kinds of gear and luggage and stuff, and I'm like, who here is Corey? And he goes, I'm Corey. I said, and so I told him, Christina Cassidy gave me your name, and he goes, no problem, I'll take the stuff back with me. I said, okay, great, thanks. So then we got to where we were going, and we started classes. And one of the things Christina told me was, make sure that you take a couple of ratty t-shirts with you, because you can sunburn if you're not careful on your back. So make sure that you wear the t-shirts, and the salt water, they're going to get trashed, so just make sure that you can live without them. So I was wearing a Zildjian Symbols t-shirt. I've always loved drumming, and one of the tenants in my apartment building, because my dad was a handyman for a big luxury apartment building, was Billy Cobham, famous drummer. And so he would always pass T-shirts and promotional stuff to my dad for us. So I'm wearing this Zildjian Cymbals, and it really is a ratty T-shirt, okay, because it's white with blue 3/4 sleeves, and it's got the Zildjian Cymbals, and then on the back it's all written in Farsi, the logo. So I'm wearing this T-shirt, and Corey comes up to me, and he goes, "Where did you get this T-shirt?" I mean, he's just like stunned. He'd never seen one like that. So I said, "Oh, judging from your reaction, you must be a drummer." He goes, "Oh, I've drummed since I was 5 years old." So I said, "You're kidding." I said, "Well, then you know who gave this to me." I said, "A friend of the family, his name is Billy Cobham." He goes, "You know Billy Cobham?" And I said, "Well, yes." I said, "Are you familiar with his work?" He goes, "Yeah, but I normally drum big band swing music." I said, "Oh, then you must love Gene Krupa and Buddy Rich." He goes, "Oh, Buddy Rich is my idol." I said, "Well, I love Buddy Rich's Red Album. I think his version of West Side Story is brilliant." And I said, "And I think his rendition of Chameleon it's amazing." So we started talking about drumming and music, and what kind of drum set do you have, and this kind of thing. And Dr. Kaplan is watching this. So then this happened right before class started on that day. This might have been like the third day we were there. And so Dr. Kaplan starts the class, and he says, and by this time the Maryland people had come in too, so there's like 30 of us, I think. And he says, every year that I've held this course, a couple meets and gets married. He says, every year. So look around, because 2 of you will be getting married. And we're all looking around like, sorry lot this is, That's it. You're thinking to yourself, I don't think so. We were the couple.
Wow.
And it was after that we started sitting together, then we started taking notes together, and we started doing all our classwork together, and then we also had to do a paper on something indigenous to the island. So I focused on the succulents and cactus that grew up on that island, that grew on the island. So I did my paper on that, because it was a third of it was the lab, third of the grade was your lab work, then a third of the grade was your exam, and then a third was your paper. So that's how we met. And mind you, I dated some of his friends. Both had gone to Hofstra University as undergrads. We never met there.
Wow.
I went to New York Law School, and he went to graduate school there. I mean, that's how we met. Everybody always assumes, oh, you met, in the military. No, we met in the British Virgin Islands in a tropical marine biology course. He was setting up the lab, and I was a student.
It's an incredible story.
It is.
Thank you for asking that question.
Yeah, I'm glad you did, because I always tell people a ratty Zildjian Cymbals T-shirt, and I remember telling him, "Oh, Billy Cobham drums. He has Tama drums," and then that's when he goes, "Oh, I have Slingerland drums." I said, "I've always wanted to take drum lessons. That's one of my bucket list items. Now that I've retired, I have 5 things on my bucket list, and one of them is I've had 3 lessons so far." And I'll resume them in the fall, because it was just too difficult working and commuting, especially after he passed away, because he died, and he died Labor Day. His uncle died the next day. His father died that Friday, and the following week, my uncle's widow died. So we took 4 bullets to the chest, and then we carpooled, because we lived in Chatham, and it was 92 miles to Scott Air Force Base. So we were in a carpool of 4. There was me, there was a Navy 06 and a Navy 05, and then Corey. And the month after Corey died, the Navy 06 had a stroke and was medically retired. And then the Navy 05 finished, he reached retirement, and he retired in December. So I went from having a carpool of 4 to just me. And the plan originally was to retire together when I turned 60, but I was just too distraught. And both my grief psychologist and my chaplain said, "You'll know when you're ready to retire." And this year I said, "I'm ready." I was not ready then. That would not have ended well for me if I had retired then. So I'm glad you asked. And then this was a picture of us in 1981.
Wow.
So in contrast, when we retired. So I was 107 when we got married. I'm not 107 now. So.
You guys look amazing.
And then this was him when we had his military honors funeral in September of 2013. So he developed a patient aeromedical evacuation program that's used DoD-wide. It's called TRACES. It's the reason we have such a high recovery rate from the war zone.
Wow.
So he's left an amazing legacy.
Wow. I wanted to go back and ask you a question regarding 11 people starting that program.
Oh, yes,
I keep
11
on going
women.
back to that.
Yes.
11 women and only 3 finished.
Yes.
What characteristics do you think allowed you specifically and those 3 in general
Out of the
to
3 of us?
finish that program?
That's a good question, because I know that 2 of the 11 were physical fitness majors. So if anything, we thought, hey, they could set the standard. In my case, because I was a scholarship student, there was no doubt that I was going to finish this program. My parents said, we will get you as well educated as possible. The 3 of you will go to college, but you will have to go on scholarships because we don't have the money. And so you have to make sure that you fulfill the requirements of whatever scholarship you receive. My friend Mary was the only daughter, and she had she was in her brother's shadow. She had an older brother, very accomplished. I'm not quite sure what he majored in, but I mean very, very accomplished. And so I think she wanted to shine or outshine him. I was the oldest. I'm 7 years older than my sister Diana and 10 years older than my sister Ellen. So each of us, they say that when you have siblings that are more than 5 years apart, each one is like a firstborn and therefore an overachiever. And I think that's what did it for all of us, not just for me. Roberta, there was a rifle team. The ROTC program had a rifle team, and she was on the rifle team. And I think, as someone who, I am a NRA endowment member, and I am a bit of a gunsmith. I think that it's a different mindset. I think each of us having these unique drivers is what made the difference. I was really shocked because when you join the program, if you're not on scholarship, the first 2 years are voluntary. You get college credit for them. But then at the end of the second year, before you go to basic camp, you have to elect and commit, and you sign the papers. And so the other 8, they didn't sign papers. And it was shocking because one of them was pre-med. And I would have thought she could have gotten a free ride, a full ride, because knowing this from the Air Force and the Army is no different. They have difficulty recruiting professions, be they nurses, audiologists, doctors, attorneys, engineers. And so, and she was a really smart girl. I was really shocked that she did not view ROTC as a path to getting to her professional degree. So I think that was what made it different. Mary was Italian. I don't know what Roberta's ethnicity was.
What kind of life lessons do you think you've learned from serving in the military?
Oh, well, whenever anybody says, "Oh, I'm having a bad day," I'll say, "Well, you're not carrying 100 pounds of gear on your back, and people aren't shooting at you trying to kill you. In the grand scheme of things, you're not having a bad day." The make your bed was a life lesson. Every morning you make your bed, and that sets the tone for your day. Sometimes you're the cookie. When you're in basic training, and you have to understand, you're filthy, you're sweating, you're filthy. If you do something wrong, and wrong meaning that you don't march right, or, not something heinous, just something wrong, your drill instructor will make you go, and he'll either make you roll in the sand if you're in a sandy area, or roll in the mud if it's been raining. So you're covered like a sugar cookie, So sometimes you'll be the cookie. So yeah.
I was wondering.
Yeah. No, this isn't, Then the other one you learn is you give a mouse a cookie, he's going to want a glass of milk. So you have to really stand firm, because sometimes you just have to stand firm. You have to stand by your beliefs, And then the other one is there will be people, don't compare yourself to other people, because there will be people who are smarter than you. There will be people who are faster, better in some way, will have more talent than you. The key is to learn something from them or to teach them something. And I wanted to have 5 children. We were never blessed with children. And my chaplain once told me something that really stayed with me, and that she quoted Isaiah. She said, "The barren woman mothers many children. The barren woman mothers many children. And my children were the young airmen and soldiers that I mentored, the paralegals that I've mentored, that you don't think you have an impact until they come back." And I want to tell you a story. There was a young Airman Cruz. She was from California, bright kid. Gosh, she was so smart. And I said, one day this girl could be Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force. She could be in charge of all the enlisted. She was just that great. And we were talking one day, and she said, "Oh, I'm enlisted because I want to use the GI Bill to go to college." And I remember telling her, hold on, I gotta blow my nose. the academies are open to women now. Why don't you apply to the academy? And I didn't know this, but apparently the Air Force Academy, and I guess all of them do, they have a special admissions program for enlisted people, that if you get the support of alumni and your wing commander, you get an appointment, and you do 1 year, which I guess would be like the equivalence of like our officer training, and then you start the academy as a cadet. And at the time, Colonel Hornacek was the wing commander, and he had graduated from the academy. And Colonel Huskisson was my staff judge advocate. I was a civilian at this time, because this was 5 years ago now. And so I talked to Colonel Huskisson, and I said, Joanne, we talked about Joanne. I said, do you think that maybe we could get her into the academy? And he goes, she's got what it takes, So we asked her formally, if you want, we will work with you to get you into the academy. And she was like, she didn't think she could. And so we went down to see Colonel Hornacek, and he goes, gladly. So he wrote her, you're supposed to get a letter of recommendation from your supervisor. And he goes, no, we'll send it from the wing commander. This is not normally done, okay? But she was she was like Airman of the Quarter and Airman of the Year and Diamond Sharp Award. I mean, she was on the ball. We got her into the academy. And she invited me to her graduation this past May.
Wow.
So she's now stationed. She told me she's going to be at McConnell Air Force Base in Kansas as a second lieutenant.
Wow.
So she wrote me a very beautiful letter thanking me. You don't think it matters until that kind of stuff happens.
But you always thought it mattered, though.
Oh, yes, because having never been the beneficiary of a mentor, I knew how critical it was to have someone shepherd. If I can help you in any way, and this is what I tell them, if I can help you in any way, you ask. Maybe I can't help you, but maybe I know of someone who can, or maybe I don't think you're worth the time of day, but at least I can tell you why and what's wrong, but ask. And that's why I was so disappointed when Colonel Rodriguez said that to me, that he couldn't waste his collateral on a female.
Wow.
But he was a product of the times. So, anyway.
You've seen times change since then.
Oh my goodness. Like I said, the whole time I was in uniform, I never had a woman boss. I mean, anywhere, Army or Air Force, either as a engineer or transportation officer in the Army or as a JAG. It wasn't until I became a civilian attorney in the Air Force that I saw. Finally, we had a wing commander, female wing commander. It was, once again, I was a civilian GS attorney. We never had the vice commander of Transcom, the deputy commander of Transcom was a woman. Again, I was a civilian attorney. So nothing while I was in uniform.
Wow.
That's why I thought it was wonderful when there were women who were trying to go to Ranger School and special training schools and pushing for going into combat arms and combat service support and combat support, because that's where that's how you make big rank. And so effectively it was kind of like a glass ceiling. But as I said, it was 1972, the academies weren't even accepting women. VMI, look at what happened with Shannon, the young girl who tried to get into VMI. And that wasn't that long ago. Because I remember I had already been commissioned when that started. Women comprise 50% of the population. Why would you not allow a society to benefit from the gifts and talents of that population.
Right.
And that's, I don't like waste. I dislike people who are given a talent and don't use it. And so I do not understand why more isn't done or why more isn't happening. Because my biggest concern now is if you are my age or younger and you don't have military service, you better be prepared to explain to me why you don't. And if you did serve, I think you should be rewarded for that, because you really gave up a lot. I gave up partnership in law firms because I was a reservist and I moved around a lot. I had one law firm tell me, we can hire you, but you will not be on a partnership track because you're a reservist. But it's like, well, I want to practice my profession, so if that's the price I have to pay, then okay, because I didn't have the privilege of being able to stay in one place. I moved all around. This is the longest place I have ever lived, because we bought this house in 1999, and I remember we went to some sort of home builder show, and the lady asking us, do you own your home? That's the first question I guess they screen. And I stood there like this. Yeah. And she goes, you had to think about it. I said, well, you don't understand. We're military, and when your husband is the clinic commander, you live in a designated house on base. So the first, 18 years of our career, we lived in military family housing on base. So buying a house, you just didn't buy a house. So I told her, I said, this is the first house we've bought. That's why we're here, because we got a lot of stuff we want to do to the house. But yeah, that, and it didn't sink in until that woman asked that question, because we were both looking at each other like, yeah, yes we do. So.
I wanted to ask you, I know we touched on a lot of things, and this has been a really incredible interview.
Well, thank you.
Is there anything else that we maybe haven't touched on that you thought that you wanted to share with anyone who would be watching this interview or reading in the future?
Talk to the women in your family who are my age, because a lot of us have some experiences that we never talk about. For example, my friend who's English, I have a lot of friends from England from when I was stationed there, a lot of British friends. Talked to her aunt after they named the granddaughter after the aunt. And it was only then that she found out that her aunt was one of the code breakers. Yeah, but because of the Official Secrets Act, they could not, the Bletchley Circle is what they were called. Right. But because of the Official Secrets Act, they could never talk about it until after, I guess, certain number of years. And then they made the movie, The Bletchley Circle. And that's when Christine found out that her Aunt Nell was one of the Bletchley Circle women. I never knew until Saving Private Ryan came out. I never knew that my father-in-law was a D-Day veteran. I knew he enlisted on Pearl Harbor Day. He was underage, so his parents had to sign the paperwork. I knew he served with Patton, because when that movie came out, he said that George C. Scott, it was scary that he was like more Patton than Patton. So that's how I knew he served with Patton's Third Army. Wow. But it was not until Saving Private Ryan came out and Joseph attended a special premiere for the D-Day veterans that I learned that he was in the third wave. That's why he survived. That he was a Jewish kid from Brooklyn who freed a Jewish death camp. I never knew any of this. So if, however old you are, if you've got relatives, that you need to ask, because we don't volunteer this stuff. It's very painful, as you can tell, to talk about. But it's also very important. I don't have anything that belonged to my father-in-law. He went looking when they moved from New York. They relocated to Atlanta, Georgia, decades ago. He gave me his tank periscope from his tank. That I have. I don't have a photo of him, no dog tags, nothing. So that's why it was so important when Uncle Howard gave me the grandfather's World War I, because I have a lot of stuff, including the photo of my grandfather in his doughboy uniform with his pistol, and I have the pistol,
wow,
complete with the paperwork from Smith Wesson. So ask. I've offered to mentor my nephew. I haven't heard back. We'll see. I passed the offer through my parents and directly to my sister. We'll see what happens. So that's the most important thing, is you need to ask, because you never know. You know, it wasn't until Commander Dudley escorted me down to the booth here, I didn't know about this project. I never knew about the American Legion until Corey died. And I had the obituary in the paper, and it said, you know, Lieutenant Colonel Yousaf retired. And the services officer of Post 759 knocked on my door and said, I understand that your husband was a veteran. I said, we're both military retirees. That's how I met my Legion family.
wow.
And they were instrumental in arranging the honors funeral at Scott Air Force Base. You know, so you don't know, you don't even know where to ask. Like I said, if Les hadn't knocked on my door, I wouldn't be wearing this cap today. I serve as the staff judge advocate for my post. I serve as the staff judge advocate for my district, the 21st district. And we have a woman post commander. I've asked, they've never had a Puerto Rican commander. I don't know if I would want to do that, because I love being the staff judge advocate, and there's a need. You know, every post needs a lawyer. But that's my biggest pieces of advice. Be a mentor if you can, and ask the people, your relatives. I never knew. This you will not believe. There was a movie that came out called Defiance with Daniel Craig and Liev Schreiber. And it was about some Polish Jews who ran resistance in the forests against the Nazis. My mother-in-law told me that her Uncle Morris is the Daniel Craig character. We went to see this movie, and Corey and I were sitting at dinner. He goes, you know, I think this might be my family. And I'm like, what? He goes, I think that's Uncle Morris. He goes, but I have to talk to Mom when we get back. So then we get back home, and we call, and she goes, yes. There were 6 brothers, Morris and the other one, played by Liev Schreiber, were the 2 youngest. And when the Nazis set in, because Vilna had the largest Jewish population, and so there was a big uprising, and the Nazis almost lost. They lost. They tried to set up another ghetto like they did in Warsaw, and Hitler had to dispatch a tank unit to quell the uprising, and so many of them fled into the forests, right where Vilna, Poland is. Vilna, Poland then is now Vilnius, Lithuania. And the 2 brothers were forest fighters, freedom fighters. And then they set up a death camp there, but they escaped. There was the Jews. They were like, we're not taking this. And my mother, Potasnik was the last name, and my mother-in-law said yes, that was her Uncle Morris. After the war, he came to the States. He ran a trucking company. Yes. So, but I'll never forget that, sitting in the theater and Corey looking at me, because I think this is my family, but this sounds familiar. I never knew, but for this movie, I would never have known. And mind you, I never met the relatives because, I think Morris lived to be 99 years old or something. But obviously, this was before I married into the family in '81. So it's the importance of talking to people. There was a gentleman I was doing a notary for. One day, I'm a civilian notary. They needed someone to notarize some documents, so I went up front to the reception desk to do the notaries, and I was talking to him. He goes, "Oh, I remember the legal office for the 375th Airlift Wing at Scott." Oh, ooh, mood lighting.
I can keep going.
Okay, okay. Is in the historic headquarters building. The building was from the 1930s, and he goes, "Oh, I remember when we had map reading classes, training here at Scott." So I said, and mind you, the gentleman, if I'm 62, the guy has to be at least 75. And I said, "Well, when were you here?" He goes, "Oh," and he was talking, it was in the 60s. I said, "You were talking about the map reading classrooms over on the flight line." He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "That's where my legal office used to be. Because when I was in uniform, the legal office was on the flight line in these old map reading classrooms. So if you were in the middle of trial and aircraft were landing or taking off, which always happens on a military installation, you had to stop because the noise would drown out everything and the building would shake. And then it was only 1997 when we moved into the second floor of the wing headquarters building. So we were there since like the 40s, because we always had map reading training there. So now the buildings obviously have been razed to the ground because they were death traps. But yeah, so you talk to people, you just never know. I had one gentleman, I'll never forget this. Captain Brady, he was in my office. He was a JAG, young kid, and he deployed to Gitmo, Guantanamo. And then he came back after his assignment. He goes, he says, "You're not going to believe this." He goes, "My dad," or was it his grandfather, it had to have been his grandfather, was posted in Guantanamo Bay, I guess in the 40s. And he took a picture. He has a picture of his dad standing in front of a Jeep in front of this building. And so Bob said, "I went and got a Jeep and I positioned it, and he had the same picture taken in the same spot in front of the Jeep in front of this building." Yeah. So I said, "I didn't know your father was in Guantanamo." He goes, "Yeah, he was a bit of a discipline problem," is what he said. I said, we all have, we've all been there. So, what else did you want to ask?
I had one final question.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
What was it like to make the transition? I'm trying to write this really.
Mm-hmm.
From, you said the Army's where you started and then you went into the Air Force?
Yeah.
What was that like?
It wasn't too bad. I mean, I was an officer, I was a first lieutenant when I transferred over, and then I was a first lieutenant for like 2 or 3 months, and then became a captain in the Air Force. The biggest transition, or the biggest issue I had, was In the Army, I was a line officer, so I made decisions every day. I was a platoon leader. I was an XO. So you make a lot of decisions after input from a lot of people. When you're a JAG, you're a staff officer, so you advise. And that's where I came out with the comment. I get paid very well to give advice that is ignored. That was the hardest part. You lay out everything. The commander will say, what do you think I should do? What do you advise? And you give them 3 courses of action. And you say, well, I think this would be your best course of action, but the commander takes the 3rd course of action. That was the toughest part, that you're a staff officer and you are not the ultimate decision authority. And I've always said, if I give you advice and it's bad advice and you take it, the liability comes back to me. The responsibility falls to me. Now, if I give you advice and you don't take it and it goes bad, you can't come back to me to accept responsibility because you went against your lawyer's advice. So I think it wasn't so much from Army to Air Force, because we had PT requirements and weight requirements and 3510 uniform requirements. That was never an issue. The issue was making the transition from being a line officer to being a staff officer. That really, that was the big change.
What kind of adjustment in your attitude did that take?
The first year was tough. That was difficult. It was like, even though I had always been an attorney, by that time, 83, I had been an attorney for 2 years. And with my law firm, clients are paying you for your advice. So if you tell them do A, B, and C, they're going to do A, B, and C, because they know, you're going to steer them. They're facing financial harm or legal harm. But here, you have input just as any other staff officer would, and then the ultimate decision lies with the commander. So, and it was tough to watch, commanders not take the advice you give them or discount it, or, because 9 times out of 10 it would blow up into something awful. And then I would feel bad, like, I failed you, but it wasn't for want of trying.
Sure.
I can't force you to accept the advice I give you or to follow the advice I give you. This new wave of commanders, since I've been a civilian, are the opposite. They want input from everybody. They'll ask you twice, 3 times, and because they want to make sure, because the stakes are high, and so you don't run into that as often. But I think it's also a function of the generation. There's some times where commanders say, look, they don't want a lawyer there, but will you come? I'm sure, no problem. Because I know that when an attorney enters the room, it ratchets up everything. And so I'm very mindful of that. But if the commander requests that I attend, it's the same thing here. For certain committee meetings, the SJA doesn't attend, but I ask my district commander, would you like me there? Yes, absolutely. Okay, then I'll go. Because I want to be of service and serve my commander as best as I can.
So I guess my final question, I guess you're uniquely positioned to give this advice. What advice would you give someone, particularly a female minority who is thinking about going into one of the armed forces?
Take very good care of yourself physically, because it is demanding. I mean, you have to be a jock. There's just no other way around it. I played softball when I was in high school, and it really helped me. Make sure your academics are impeccable. I mean, you don't have to be Einstein, but whatever classes you take, study hard and do the best you can. Because you will be ranked when you graduate, be it basic training or ROTC, OTS, you will be ranked. And how you're ranked in terms of your scores will determine the career path you put on. It will be the toughest road you will ever take, but it will be the most rewarding road you will ever take.
I wanted to, first of all, thank you for this interview. It's been amazing.
Oh, okay, great.
And
I'm sorry I fell apart, you know,
you
but
did not.
Oh,
And
okay.
I wanted to thank you for your service. It's been
it was
a real
my
honor to be here.
It was my honor to serve.
Time is 11:14.
Oh my goodness. I know she said to try and make it 30 minutes.